Hello and welcome. I'm Shan Vanderleek, producer and founder of podcastpath.com. I enjoy supporting and interviewing bright minds and successful entrepreneurs about their new offerings. And today it's my pleasure to introduce you to Yvette Bethel and share a conversation about her new podcast, Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures, which will be relaunching on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, and more podcast players very soon. As a consultant, advisor, author, speaker, and trainer, Yvette understands the people side of organizations and how to effectively bring together the corporate vision of business with the talents of staff. She helps organizations take the steps toward resolving strategic people issues. Yvette is a Fulbright scholar who puts her acquired knowledge and skills to good use with over 30 years' experience. She's the author of the books Equilibrium and the USA Best Book Award-winning Getting to Equilibrium. Yvette's latest book, Interconnectivity, Flow, and Balance, provides fresh perspectives and practical advice about modern leadership and change. Welcome, Yvette.
It's a pleasure to be here, Shan. Thank you for that long intro.
Well, it's a long and impressive intro, right? You've earned it.
Wow.
It's always strange to be on the other side of the microphone listening to somebody share all of your, and this isn't even all of it. This is part of it.
Oh, no.
Let's talk about your inspiration for the new and improved Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures podcast.
I think the best way to start would be to just take a look at something that I did many years ago, because I believe I was on this path for a long time. And when I was working full-time, before I went into my own business, I started a list that I called the games people play at work. And on that list, I just wrote down all of the things that I observed people doing to each other, because I was in HR and responsible for HR in multiple jurisdictions. And it was just interesting to see the games people would play and the different, the nuances and the subtle differences between some of them. But I was always interested. And we trained with leadership, and we provided a lot of different, talent development opportunities. And, these games persist. And so in moving on to, what I feel is modern, we need to take a look at people's hearts and, just rebuild how we connect and interact. And instead of taking a kind of superficial approach to making change happen, I'm seeing and identifying a need for us to take a much deeper approach. And it starts all with trust.
Well, and you've been doing so much good work for so many years. It's really nice to see you evolve as we talk about how your new podcast is evolving, your new book coming out, all of the ways that you've taken this work right back to those beginning days.
Yeah.
And are here now saying, okay, here's what I've learned, and here's how I can help you.
Yeah. Because really, when it comes down to it, it's not enough to look at individual performance or team performance. You really need to look at the entire organizational ecosystem to understand, okay, what are some of these norms and how are they impacting us, and what are the costs of that impact or the benefits? And, just understanding the tensions and developing new skills for leading in these modern times.
And I suspect over the years of running your own business and doing so much work within different organizations, that you've seen a lot of leaders land in positions without any leadership training, without any maybe a little bit of information to get started, or maybe a star salesperson who's put in a leadership role but has never had any experience in management or or freedom cultures or any of that stuff. And so I suspect there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, yeah, you're talking about entry level, but I work predominantly with executives. At the executive level, we find that they feel that everybody else needs the training and not them. Now, they may have been trained with some sort of management training or some kind of course in leadership many years ago.
Yeah, right.
But the world has evolved. The entire environment has evolved. We're living in a world where things are unpredictable, it's more complex, things are ambiguous. You need different skills. So if everyone else is getting trained and the leaders are not evolving their skills, then they're putting a lid on the organization because the organization can't evolve past their capacity to observe, to lead, to make decisions, and so forth. In order for executives and boards to take organizations past where they are now, they need to see it a lot more differently. And
I agree. Yeah,
yeah.
without question. Yvette, who are your Evolve podcasts created for? Are they created for executives?
Executives can benefit, yes, definitely. Managers can benefit because they are also impacted by the same kinds of systems and interactions on a day-to-day basis. I would also include business owners.
You talk a lot about in your writing and in conversation about building a freedom culture. What does that mean to you when you talk about building freedom cultures?
Well, this is something that I'm quite passionate about because a lot of times when I walk into an organization, I can feel this sense of being controlled, where people's lights are not on and they're doing what they have to do, they're surviving. And in a freedom culture, the very few that I've witnessed, it's a totally different experience. People are alive. They're connected to their work. They're connected with each other. They are okay with saying the hard stuff. They're okay with saying, well, I don't agree with that. They may have divergent views and they're not shy about saying it. Whereas in a controlled or a compliance culture, who's going to say, I don't agree with you?
Right.
Who's going to put their neck on the line? It's very difficult to do that when people are operating from a place of survival. When your basic needs are not met, there's no way that you can move to the level of self-actualization and ask those kinds of questions and team actualizations when you're stuck with, am I going to get fired if I say this?
Right. Well, and it gets back to, as you mentioned earlier, it all comes back to trust, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I really believe trust is at the core, and trust is the only way for people to open their hearts and connect.
You started with a teaching podcast and now plan to transition to supportive professional conversations. Who are some of the experts that you're going to be speaking with?
Good question. Well, it's going to have some teaching components. So from time to time, I will intersperse some kind of podcast with just me talking about various topics from my book.
Okay.
But the kinds of people that I want to speak with, some of them come from the Emotional Intelligence Network that I'm a part of. It's the largest one globally, and it's called 6 Seconds. And we're starting with some of their representatives, but we're also venturing into other areas where people who are creating future societies and planning for what the future of business will be. I will be speaking with them as well. And because for me, it's really important to start opening up the imagination of people. Business has been one thing mostly, and you know, even though different companies do things differently, a lot of times there's sameness that's happening as well. And although I should acknowledge that there are a lot of companies that seeking to be individuated and to have their personalities come through their cultures. One of the things that even when I train, I like to push you past your limits of what you thought was the case and help you to stretch your thinking. I'd like to start with that, helping people to stretch their thinking and stretch their ideas about how things should be, because we've been conditioned to see things a certain way. And I think it's time for us to, question what we've accepted as the norm, and take a bold step. Find your voice as a company, instead of falling into this whole group of people or companies called the competition.
Or this is the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So let's talk about what your subscribers and listeners are going to take away from your stories and conversations and teachings as you help them reinvent leadership and help them learn to build a freedom culture.
Well, a freedom culture, if we're going to challenge the status quo, it has to start from the inside out. So it starts with changing how you view trust, because people make blanket statements like, I don't trust this one, or I trust this one. And I get into, what does that really mean? And really digging deeper into, how is that serving you? And how is that, or in other words, how is that impacting your brand and your credibility and your ability to impact and influence others? We start with trust, and we're going and we're looking at it from different perspectives. Then we take a look at, okay, trust is the beginning, and that's intrinsic. Let's start looking at, how do we interact with each other, and what's the quality of the relationships, and how is that quality affecting performance, individual and team and organizational.
And so I suspect that that's kind of segues into the interconnectivity, the flow, and balance. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how interconnectivity, flow, and balance can enhance an organization's climate.
Interconnectivity, flow, and balance. I start out talking about it as being kind of like the operating system that works in the background of the organization. So you can have a system that's apparently working, but it's this working despite a lot of dysfunction. For instance, you can have like a high performing team that's very driven by fear. But studies show when people are happy and engaged, they are much more likely to create synergies and perform at even higher levels. So imagine if people are in survival mode and performing, if you can shift them to being in an engaged mode and performing, I mean, the sky could really potentially be the limit.
The interesting thing about that, from my perspective, is it takes that blanket of fear and that dark pressure and turns it into this opportunity to bloom.
Exactly. And that blossoming really can be about creativity, innovation, in the form of innovation, in the form of problem solving, and with the trust being what it should be, people are willing to step up and say these things. But the book itself is, it starts out looking at interconnectivity with trust as the base, and then I take an unconventional approach to interconnectivity, because it's not limited to the human interaction. It's really how the structures form that interaction. So I take a look at, what's your organizational design? What does your chart look like? What are your policies looking like? Because if you're saying we're a freedom culture and you have a compliance structure in place, well, you're going to be a compliance culture.
Right, right.
So the structure cannot contradict, who you say and what you say you are. In the book, we also take a look at various types of flow because you can be in the zone that people think about when they think about flow, but some of it is much more mechanical because there are a lot of fear-based environments where flow is just a matter of workflow going from point A to point B, to the end of the line, and then it goes into sales and so forth. It's also very mechanical in that way, uh, and that's where we start because you start where we are. And there's a book when it comes to balance. There's a book called the Three Tensions, but I believe that there are more than three. I think there are multiple tensions that we can pay attention to in an organization, and think about, this tension is here, that tension is there. How do we move those balance points so that we're working optimally? Because you'll always have tensions in the business. Which ones
Sure.
attention to, and which ones will have the most impact if we leverage them and move them in a direction that we want them to go in? How will they, or which ones will have the greatest impact? I want to take a look at that whole system and help leaders to be able to build the capacity to manage that in the context of strategy and all of the other things that are going on. These will be baseline foundational skill sets that can plug into almost any other compatible kind of system that exists. So once you have core values that align with trust, once you have other systems that are aligned and not contradicting what you're setting out to do, they can plug into the IFB system. And
Right, right.
so it's not a replacement, it's an enhancement.
And it all goes back to what is the pillar of trust within the organization, and how can you grow that trust so that you can help leaders build freedom cultures? Because without that pillar of trust, you're in trouble.
Absolutely. And I mean, to answer your question in the simplest way, the pillar is made up of three competencies that have multiple sub-competencies attached, but the three major competencies are integrity, self-mastery, and I focus on emotional mastery. And then the third one is something I call the we disposition. So you're stepping out of the whole me phase, and it's all about me and every man for himself. And now you're, focusing on the team and how the team will evolve together. That is the foundation. And there are multiple competencies built within those three. But those three are the foundation for the pillar of trust, with integrity at the very base.
Yvette, I'm so glad that you're bringing all of this forward, both in your book and in your podcast, to relaunch Evolve and bring this great information forward. When does Evolve launch, and where can people subscribe and listen in?
Evolve launches on February the 4th, 2019. And they can subscribe and listen in on iTunes.
And I think you'll also be on Stitcher and Podbean,
Yeah.
and wherever the podcast directories are set up that you were already
Yeah.
sharing your brilliance with back in the day. Those are still all set up as well. And before we wrap today, Yvette, what would you like to leave your listeners with before this new journey begins, reinventing leadership and building freedom cultures?
I think the one thing that I would want to say is, Evolve is really about evolution. It's about transformation. And really, that's what my book is about. That's what my business is about. That's what I am about. And that's what the podcast is about. It's transformation. Really, the only way to get there is from the inside out. And there's no more take a course and you have a certificate and you're there. It's like, let's dig deep and let's go back and question some things that we've learned. Let's go back and relearn some things and really shift intrinsically so that we can shift, especially for leaders, so that they can shift the environment around them at a deep level. No more superficial change. It's more focused on transformation.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation today. I'm really looking forward to listening in to your Evolve 2.0, Reinventing Leadership and Building Freedom Cultures. It's going to be a great podcast. Everything you produce is top notch. And so it's good to see you back in the podcasting realm. Congratulations on your new book, Interconnectivity, Flow, and Balance. I look forward to listening in.
Thanks a lot, Shan, and just thank you for helping me kick off Evolve 2.0. I'm looking forward to it.
Yvette Bethel, a consultant, advisor, author, speaker, and trainer, bringing you a brand new podcast on February 4th, Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures. You'll definitely want to listen in.